Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Claire Javot, and I'm the Director of Programme at Help Musicians UK. First of all, can I just ask if you have heard of Help Musicians UK? If you can put your hand up, that would be great. So the team from Help Musicians UK can see those people who haven't put their hand up, and you might get nobbled afterwards and ask some questions. We're here today to talk about this panel. Thank you very much for coming and listening to us. We're here to talk about what Help Musicians UK has been doing over the last couple of years, in particularly the response to a survey that we launched in 2016. And the resulting service, Music Minds Matter, that came out of that service. We are the leading UK independent charity for the music industry. We've been going for nearly 100 years. We are celebrating our centenary in 2021, and we provide holistic support for everyone within the industry. So that's everything about being in the career of a musician or a performer or working within the industry, as well as your health and welfare. And I'm delighted to be heading up the programme team, which looks at all of those aspects that we do. We're going to be talking a lot more throughout this session about what Music Minds Matter is, the service, and some of the findings from the research that we undertook. And we've got an incredibly experienced and knowledgeable panel for you here today. I'm going to ask them individually to introduce themselves to you and to share a bit about their background and why they're here today, particularly to talk about mental health in the music industry. So first of all, just checking that I haven't forgotten to say anything. First of all, can I ask Chris, who has the microphone, to go first? Chris, please, can you introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Chris Madden. I spent 20 years working in music. Artist manager, working for a major. I retrained and I've been a therapist. I'm an integrative counselling psychotherapist. I've been working in therapy for 10 years. I do a mixture of both private practice, which I do 2 to 3 days a week. I'm working a little bit too much at the moment, working Saturdays as well. The rest of the week I work in a really small private university. It's a niche university working 3 degree courses with a really small cohort of 175 students. And our niche is the live events industry, so it's music industry related.
Hi, I'm Sally Ann Gross, and I was the lead researcher on the research Can Music Make You Sick? I'm the programme director of the MA Music Business Management at the University of Westminster, and I've been a music manager, an A&R person, a music lawyer, and working in the music industry. I'm currently still head of international business affairs for a label in Paris, and I've been in the music industry for 30 years, which is a long time. Yeah, is that it?
Yeah, that's great, Sally. Thank you.
I'm Adam Fisek. I'm a musician, a therapist, and a music teacher as well. Is that me rambling?
No, it's not you.
I thought it was me. I was bad mic technique. Yeah, boom, boom, boom. So I've been a musician, as I said, probably since late teens, so 25 odd years. Through being a musician, my journey has encompassed, it's been through studying music and then having a professional career, quite a high level for about 10 years. Now come back down to earth, being like a DIY touring musician myself. I'm also just in the final throes of finishing training as a psychotherapist. And I also run a small label, do DJing as well, and music education.
Great, thank you. So that's our panel for you today. So we're going to talk about what some practical advice on why music minds matter in the industry and what we've been doing from Help Musicians and what the work that we've been doing is crucial in today's music industry. But we also hope that we're going to give you some ideas of where you can get support from, as well as discussing some of the factors that have an impact on our mental well-being. So we're going to launch straight into the discussion. So Sally, I'm going to start with a quote from the research. So in the study, Can Music Make You Sick?, the pilot survey in 2016 found that 68% of respondents identified as experiencing depression and 71% reported as having had panic attacks. So in the UK, this suggests that musicians can be up to 3 times more likely to experience depression compared to the general public. And mental health has become a large conversation across the industry, and obviously we're here today at the Getahead Festival to continue to raise awareness and encourage people to talk more openly about it. So first of all, I want to talk about stigma, Sally. So do you think that the stigma is lifting about talking about mental health, and that mental health is moving up the agenda because of reports like Can Music Make You Sick and other things that have been happening in the industry in the last 5-10 years, say?
Well, I think part of me feels like the stigma is lifting if we define the stigma as being able to talk about mental health. I certainly think mental health as a conversation has definitely increased, and I think across the media, within our friendship groups, people talk about it. I still think people find it hard to admit in workplaces, or, I've been in therapy. I've been in therapy for years, and I advocate therapy as a good place to go. But it's very hard. I think because I partly work in Paris, I can say that, and people go, yeah, so am I. But it's much harder to say in England. People are very. I think there is a stigma about admitting that you've been in therapy, or that you would do therapy, or that you have mental health issues. So, although I absolutely believe that the conversation is really happening, I'm not sure whether I can actually say I feel the stigma is lifting, because I think it is still a very brave thing to say that you're either not, or you don't feel that you're coping. I don't actually know what coping is as a thing that we're all supposed to be doing. But to admit that you have challenges, or to admit that you may have something that people would describe as a weakness, it's in an industry that's hyper-competitive, in which even your friends may also be your competitors, is extremely difficult. So although I'm very optimistic I'm optimistic anyway as a person, but I am optimistic in terms of, I think that this conversation is growing, and I think that the echoes and reverberations from this research has reached across creative industries and the media industries, and people across those industries are recognizing some of our findings as being similar to what goes on in their industry. So I think all of that is very helpful. But I still think stigma, I still think it's hard to say that.
Adam, I was going to ask you if you wanted to reflect on that from being both a musician and then
I agree. I mean, having worked in the NHS recently, and that's come to an end, I guess I'm quite privileged in being able to sit on the firing line, the front line of the therapeutic edge, and I think there still is a big stigma with people coming to therapy. A lot of the clients will say, I really feel quite scared in being here. I don't want anybody to know I'm here, etc. And myself, I come from it from a service user perspective. So I feel I'm slightly biased in context of saying there is less stigma. And I also, I don't know, I'm trying to formulate and articulate what I mean, but I think because everybody talks about it on social media now and it's all out there, I sometimes struggle with how much that manifests in the real world, and it's almost like an excuse. Yeah, we're all talking about it, and I can put it on my Facebook page and Twitter, but when I sit down in an intimate setting with somebody, all that sizzle from social media doesn't seem to come across. So I do agree that it's opened some doors, but it's not enough, and it's very, very subtle, and perhaps we perceive it as bigger than the shift in destigmatization actually has been, because we see it everywhere. But in the real world, on the front line, from my experience, it's only shifted a small amount, and I do think it needs to shift more. And I think it's, it takes bravery sitting, even me saying explicitly, I come from a service user perspective, I can be all clear on that and own it. But there's still a sizzle. Of, I've just said that I've been vulnerable in front of a room, and it's still really hard, and I have to hold that. And I think what makes us good therapists is the fact that we can hold that and say, look, I'm not the expert here, you're not the patient. It's not that. We're kind of two broken-ish human beings trying to get through the best we can together. So that's a long way of going about saying that stigmatization slightly lifted, but I don't know how much subtlety is within that. I don't know.
So bearing in mind that, Chris, is there anything, what more can we do if there's awareness raised in a kind of very public way through social media, but if what Adam's saying is that at the heart of it, people on a one-to-one basis are still finding that difficult to own up to those things? What are the things that we could change about that?
I concur with everything that Sally and Adam have said. What we're looking for is a new normal, aren't we? you know, and it's not the new normal yet. What can we do? We can keep talking about it. We can keep posting stuff, but it's not the new normal yet. You know, the fact that, I mean, I saw somebody that I met last week, and we connected on social media, and he posted a thing up last night that said, "Isn't it great? Men are talking." Well, yeah, of course it's great that men are talking, but, you know, it's not the new normal. Yeah, well, you know, these are football. The support groups, men's support groups. Isn't it great that this support group exists? That's really new, is that? It's a really new concept that blokes come together and sit down and talk about being vulnerable. So I think there's a long way to go. But how can we do that? We keep having the dialogue, we keep having the conversation, because things aren't going to change unless we dialogue about it and we keep up that conversation. You know, the thing that you set up is brilliant. It's going to take years for it to become normality.
Thinking about talking about it then, so talking about it within the context of being within the music industry, can we talk a bit about the lifestyle of the industry and its impact on our mental health? In the report, I'm going to quote from a manager who has said, people might have a susceptibility to being anxious or being depressed, but if there's an industry that's going to draw that out of you, it's the music business. So, Sally, as one of the main researchers from Can Music Make You Sick, were you surprised by some of those findings, or did you expect to see that lifestyle had such an impact on people's mental well-being?
Well, I think both George and I, George was my partner in the research, one of the things that we were most surprised about was the consistency of our findings, no matter who we interviewed. So when we were interviewing very successful people, they were saying exactly the same things, but in a different context, or reporting similar anxieties. And obviously, we totally understand that a privileged position, you know, what these different things give you. But I think one of the things I was in LA 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I was with a group of songwriters, all of whom literally, I was in a room with 3 people that had number ones in America last year, which is weird in itself. But every single one of them was talking to me about my research and how difficult they found it sitting in a room with people listening to their songs and telling them whether they wanted them or not, because they were all songwriters. So none of them were actually performers, which put them, you know, and they were totally aware that they weren't ever going to be singing their songs. So someone else, but one of them is incredibly successful, a young person, and only 24, was saying that they just did not want to do those meetings anymore because they just wanted their managers to do that. And their manager was saying, it's no good, you need to be there because they want to meet you. And they were saying, but I could just write my songs. I don't have to be in the room where someone tells me what's wrong with my songs. And they had a funny tale about a song that was rejected by 2 different A&R people and then was a massive number 1. So they were like laughing about that. And that's a very kind of, although that's atypical because it's massively successful, it's also very much echoes and repeats the experience down the music supply chain, where young musicians are constantly being appraised by people, or they go to meet a manager and their manager says, well, what you need to do is this, and it's always one thing more than the thing you've already done, and it always seems to be that you're one step away, or you're 1,000 likes away, or so that constant feeling of where is the line that I need to get to, where's the door I need to enter, was very much, that was a thematic across this idea of valuing your work and valuing yourself, was thematic no matter where you were. So I think that was surprising. I think we found that surprising, that it really didn't matter where you were in that chain. That vulnerability of being someone that made something. I always liken it to, like, all the things you make are like your children. So if people started saying you didn't like your children, you would be upset, wouldn't you? You'd be like, shut up. My children are lovely. But, so I think that thing is that very personal thing of, this is what I've made, and now I'm going to put it out there So yeah, that I definitely think was what was surprising. But were we surprised that people were suffering or appeared to be suffering? I'm not sure we were so surprised. I think partly that's something that we've really acknowledged just in my working environment. So
we'll come back to value and self-belief in a minute, but if we can just carry on talking about, and maybe Adam, we can talk to you about the lifestyle, the choice of being a musician, some of your experiences of touring and being on the road, and how does the lifestyle affect mental well-being?
Well, I think there's it's dualistic. There's two parts of it. There's a part where you're a creative artist, and I believe just being a creative artist is a struggle within itself. Then there's the struggle of being a creative artist, trying to make some kind of money or commoditize your art. Then there's a struggle within the anomaly of the music industry of reframing those struggles within a context of the anomaly which is in the music industry, where you create art, you're then expected to go out and regurgitate that on a nightly basis in an environment which is predominantly fueled, all sorts of hedonistic pursuits. So I think all those stack of struggles make it really hard. I was speaking to someone this morning about the very thing. It's hard anyway, being a creative artist. Myself, I was thinking this morning before I came here, I'd done 2 hours of practice, and the internal psychological shift and deregulation of me, trying to hit arpeggios or whatever BPM, that on its own of being within that environment, and then trying to frame that within the context of the industry, and then again, framing that in the context of the touring, the sense of, and speaking for myself, I think the most psychologically unhinging experience for me was the stasis, the lifting, the shifting of my Z-list celebrity in a small moment of time in a pop group. Well, that was incredibly rewarding at one point, but on the other side, like any other way we can use to distract ourselves, it became a problem. And then obviously, substances creep into that and also other sorts of pursuits. But as I reflect on it, there's such a myriad of feeding strands to what makes it really hard. And I think to separate that out between just the music industry, even within that framework, there's the environmental concerns, there's the pressures on family, on relationships, there's the psychological, the psychosocial stuff, all the other stuff which is embroidered within that is a struggle anyway. And then you add to that the unique pressures of being a creative artist. I think it's a real, a real hub, and I kind of think, wow, why did I choose to do this? But sometimes I think it's not a choice. I think anyone that's engaged in art, it becomes a passion. It becomes something, well, I kind of need to do this. And I think putting it within the industry as it is a very difficult struggle from the word go. And then if we start adding struggling narratives and adverse childhood experiences into that framework, as we were saying, and I wasn't surprised at the findings of the research, because it's almost taken for granted in that framework. Lots of people are drawn to be musicians and drawn to that lifestyle because of the struggles they have. It enables them to somehow regulate themselves, distract themselves, find some sense of worth in their art, in their commoditization, whatever. So I think from my perspective of being in bands and trying to make it from the age of 15, I'm now, nearly mid-40s, I still do it, but the drive to make it isn't there anymore. I can do it on my own terms. I crowdfund, I release an album every other year. I do small touring amongst teaching, family, and being a therapist. I can regulate it, but I'm lucky I had that experience. I made it. I've done my front covers, done the Glastonbury, done the private jets. It wasn't what I felt it to be. I needed more, and I realised that maybe I need to go the other way rather than that way. But I think making that choice, and it brings me back round to, how can we use some of my personal experience? I think in the educational aspects of some of the colleges like BIM and ACM, maybe some of the educational could be, well, let's think about what you are going to be faced with. And let's be quite brutally honest about something. It's hard, and I used to get taken down on forums when I first started being quite open about the vulnerabilities I had. I made one comment once about saying, it was similar to a kind of a post-traumatic stress disorder when I came out of the touring craziness of a band. I just felt all over the place and saying it's probably akin to somebody coming out of a war zone. I wasn't in any way comparing it to the level of danger, just under the rate of which I was spinning. And you're looking around in hypervigilance. When's the next tour? When's the next tour? And you can't sit still. You can't exist in civvy land. And then someone bringing me up and saying, you're a musician, you've got it all, you don't know what it's like, you're earning all this money. And it's like, yes. So I think that's the view as well, which is almost like a stigmatization we hold, because it's really hard. I found it really hard. I'm quite a fragile person, and now I manage my touring really well. I can go and I can do 2 nights maximum, then I can kind of contain myself, reconnect, and it's a much more pleasurable and manageable experience. To that extent, I'm lucky because I can, I don't sell the records I used to sell, but it's manageable. And then I think we've had a manager, wanting to push and commodify that, which that's his job to do, and there's no finger pointing here because I needed that income. Then where would that leave me? Would I feel pressured to kind of upkeep and sell more records? Because we would. So I think it's a struggle, which maybe could start with the educational aspect, really.
And I think one of the things that you're raising there is that the multitude of jobs and roles that
of course,
you have.
yeah.
And I was going to ask Chris actually about most people that we're talking about, whether they're performing musicians or whether they're working back of house or whether they are DJs or producers, they're all freelance, aren't they? So
yeah,
in the main, they're basically
absolutely.
freelance, so they don't have the support network of an organisation to fall back on. So how is that lifestyle of being a freelance affecting our mental well-being?
I think it affects it massively. Nothing in that research surprised me at all. Nothing. But it's brilliant. You brought it to the fore and you put it out there, and it's something that needs to be talked about. I don't know if now's a good time to talk about the experience I had last year. There was an incident that happened on a major arena tour from a major American rock band in February last year. A local crew member was on a lighting rig and fell off that lighting rig because he wasn't clipped on, and he fell onto another local crew member who sustained massive head injuries and died on the stage in a matter of minutes. Where I work as a student support officer and counselling psychotherapist, we had 2 students working on that job, and it was a major arena tour, 70,000 people a night, sold out, 100 euros a ticket, a lot of money. I was asked to go out and talk to the 2 students to make sure that they were okay. So, I was put on a plane, sent off. On the way over, I was contacted by the production manager who said, some of our travelling crew are pretty traumatised. It's like, pretty traumatised? Would you mind seeing those guys? So they set me up in a little room backstage, and I met, over the course of a day and a half, I met 16 individuals. Guys who'd been and they were all male. Guys who'd been touring, some of them had been riggers for 25 years. None of them had ever had experience of counselling. So none of them had ever spoken about their stuff. And what I experienced over the course of a very, very long day and a bit was guys coming in, and they were a bit suspicious of who I was. Was I there to try and weed out the ones that were going to have problems and get them off the tour? And so, established within the first couple of guys who came in that I needed to explain who I was, and I was there to listen. I was there to do a bit of crisis intervention. I was there to answer questions that they might have about how this might affect them long term. And it went from this range of one guy coming in and said, I've been doing this for 25 years, I've been working on crews, and what I experienced, I'm kind of over this. I want to leave the tour straight away, but I'm not going to leave the tour because I need the income and I need the next job. And it went from him right through to, I saw it, I feel okay, but I've noticed everybody else is not feeling okay. Is that normal? And so it was a really, really wide spectrum. But one thing that they all said was, this is the worst tour that we've ever been on, and we've been noticing this coming for a number of years. We are crisscrossing borders. The incident happened in Munich. I flew out the next day to the loading in Vienna, and we worked through the night and we did the loadout as well. And I could see what they're under. We've not got as many guys on the crew this time. We are doing probably about 8 dates too many, and we're feeding this back. Adam talked about commoditisation. Everybody needs to make an income. We do. That's why we work in this. But we also have a drive as well. And there's a side to I think the music industry that's glamorous. It's not about getting a real job. So there's lots of stuff there. But for many people, it's about being in a freelance position. And for those guys, it was really, really difficult. They witnessed the death of a 19-year-old lad, and were expected to continue. The band said, actually, the band were brilliant. They said, if anybody wants to leave, they can do it, and we'll work it out. We may have to cancel shows. I understand that the voice right at the top of the tree, who are a major international live events booking agency, just said, no, this goes on. There is no cancellation of this, because you're dealing in a multi-million-dollar industry, you're dealing in a multi-million-dollar tour that cannot stop because too much is riding on it, and it's riding on it because there is an issue around shareholders. Litigation. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So yeah, being a freelancer is really, really tough, but then you've got the paymasters at the top as well who are imposing a set of rules.
Is it possible to get to those paymasters and to engage them in the conversation? Is that too a position to present?
I returned and wrote a report with a set of recommendations, which, as far as I'm aware, were largely ignored. When I returned, I spoke to our parent company and just said, look, we have an amazing opportunity now to affect change if we want to. Shame on us if we don't. And what I heard was, an awards ceremony only last night. They put a picture up of the young guy that died, and respects were paid to him and his family. And we were trying to engage in a conversation in the room with the guys right at the top, and they said there'll be a conversation 18 months ago. So I don't know. And this is why this is important. Yeah. This is really important.
So there's obviously more that we continue to need
There's
to do.
Always more.
There's always more. And we've obviously talked about as Adam said, the conversation is out there, but having the actual impact with individuals needs to have more. We've picked up a little bit about identity and self-belief already, but I'd just like to carry on that theme. And we've talked about the challenges of the lifestyle, but can I just invite you all to think about your thoughts around performance, identity, and self-belief? And again, going back to the research, there was quite a familiar theme in that research about success and what success was. And I was talking to Sally about this before, and I've worked across all art forms in my career, and if there's one factor that is across every single art form, it's the self-belief in the value of what you do as an artist. And I worked with a group of poets on a Young Poet Laureate for London programme a couple of years ago, and one of the most impactful moments for me was getting to the end of a year-long laureateship when the poet did her final talk to an audience full of other poets, full of industry people, full of publishers, and at the end of it she ended with, I am a poet, and that's the first time I've been able to say that in my life. And I thought, if that programme has given her the chance to explore herself as a poet and come to the end of it with a resolution that she felt capable of saying she was a poet, then that was a really powerful thing. So we saw that in the research, didn't we, that success is often being able to call yourself a musician. So Sally, can I invite you to talk about some of that, the downsides of success, but also how that research has actually, had a reflection on the whole of the creative sector and not just music?
Yeah, as I said earlier, I think the research really reverberated across the creative industries, and I personally had emails from different artists, from fine artists to authors, poets that I know, because I've always been very interested in poetry and spoken word. So people, I think that's a kind of common that in that particular field. And interestingly, though, I thought one of the things that's very interesting about this current moment that after the tragedy in Manchester, I thought how effective a poem was. When that poem was read, it was a massively effective moment, and I really thought that actually those moments when some bit of art or music or whatever can bring or hold people together in that way, it shows the actual power of the effective quality of music and art, poetry. And I thought that was really, that is very central to why people do it. They want to be in touch with that, kind of, the effective quality of it, the sociality of it, the way in which you communicate through your art is very important to people. And in terms of people's, in terms of how people feel about and how people felt in the study, was the fact that, we're in such a hyper-mediated position where so many messages are going out all the time, like messages, but it doesn't matter where they go. They just, so the thing about being able to call yourself a musician in a very, what would appear to be, the democratized nature of the music industry, so many more people can be musicians. Part of that competitive atmosphere reinforces the idea that being able to call yourself a musician sets you apart from the competition, as it were. So I think that's, look, there are lots of, are music students musicians? When we did our research with people that were musicians, and they all, 100% of them said that being able to call themselves a musician felt like success. But in a sense, we researched musicians that were already musicians, so we didn't go further afield. Sometimes I feel like, what if we did our research in 2 streets in Hoxton? How many would-be musicians would we feel? How many people, and I think that, even with my own master students, they're master students, so many of them are musicians and they're working as musicians. And it's that's a very difficult thing to establish, and what we called it, the precarious state of mind, the being, you are dependent on some validation. So it's like speaking without being heard, constantly speaking without being heard. And if you did that to anyone, that's like a form of torture, isn't it? If nobody listened to you, that would be a form of torture. So I think that's one thing that, it is, you are successful if somebody listened to you, that I think that's really real. So, I don't know.
And Adam, you mentioned before about the kind of the highs and lows of success, and also that a lot of that is played out in a very public way. Of course,
there's a whole media element as well. Social media and media. I had my phone tapped for 5-6 years, and when all that stuff, the band were at their peak, has a massive impact. And leaning into the validation, I think as a musician, or any artist, I think it's crucial, that external validation. We all lean into that. I feel quite privileged that I've got to the point now where I no longer feel that to the same extent I did. And of course, the music industry it provides a platform for that validation. It's match made in heaven, isn't it? This is where we can validate you, and probably why artists push themselves to such a degree for that validation. Maybe for some, it's fame, status, wealth, etc. For the art, I'm not too sure where the continuum lies, but I feel quite privileged now that it's still there and the validation is needed, but there's such a small amount. And it kind of brings me back to what people go into the industry with as well. And from the educational perspective, if it's laid out where there's some module, some emphasis on people just being reflective on why they're there. What do they want out of this? We can all say, I just want to make it. And then, so I've said with people, with clients, what is making it? What is it? What do you want to see? Yourself on the map? There's nothing wrong. I want to be on a billboard. Great, that's fine. But if we can establish what it is, for me, when it all collapsed for me, I had to peel away all the bullshit and come down and think, wow, I get a much bigger drive out of playing a chord or writing than I do in all the other stuff. And that for me was a massive revelation. It's like, wow, I feel quite free. But I feel that validation could start from, you know, people's self-reflectivity, exploring that at a younger age when they're going into it. Even I work in a primary school for a few hours, and yesterday I went into a class to get a guitar kid out, and they're all drawing emotions. They've got music and drawing emotions. I thought, wow, what an amazing thing to them to be doing here. And if they could apply some of those kind of things, their emotional content of the music people are engaging with at college level or school level would be really quite fulfilling in terms of enabling them to develop what they want out of their career, making it. Maybe some people don't want to make it. They just want to do a wedding band and they want to just exist in the music framework. Some people might just want to... I mean, I guess I'm speaking here from a musician perspective rather than somebody that's going in as a sound engineer or a different kind of
we'll
outlet.
Come back to that in a second.
But yeah, the external validation for me personally has been a massive shift and such a massive lift off of the mental health aspect, because that's a point that I can't control. Nobody can control the external validation. Someone's going to hate you. Someone's going to like you. In the world we live in now, you're exposed to that on a daily basis. 20 years ago, you didn't have to face someone trolling you on Twitter saying, yeah, you're really shit, you're this and that, just because they're angry and they need an outlet. You know, this is the world we live in now, and I guess that crosses all cultures and it crosses all times of media, but I think it's really quite impactful what people are exposed to. So maybe some training in that area as well about, look, you're going to face this, you're going to get this, but you're going to get haters, you know.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is really interesting, I think it's really good that you mentioned that, Adam, but I also think that this thing about how do we change behaviours is that you can change behaviours by beginning, you know, and I know I always use this analogy, but once upon a time it was cool to smoke. It's not cool to smoke now. People don't smoke you know, some people smoke, but it's not cool. And we learn, you know, and we're learning now that 24/7 social media activity, having, you know, working all the time, being on, we're learning that is not good for us. You know, we are learning that. I also think in this idea of promoting a new normal, that actually in, you know, understanding that we live in a setting right now where we can emote outwards, but we're not being listened to. That idea of having moments where, even in a classroom, like with my students, we have tutorials, which I don't know, like if you've been a student, you've always had a tutorial. But I'm very interested in spending, like, meeting outside of the university, taking some time somewhere that's outside of that setting, sitting down. And like one thing students will say to you, they're like, how long have we got? You know, and it's like, I don't know, how long do you need right now? You know, like, I know that might sound a bit utopian, but if you actually don't start saying, you've got 15 minutes, tell me what's wrong. If you don't do that, people communicate. And those are changes, they're shifts in how we behave. And as you begin to do that, and we can see that children in schools are suffering from these kinds of anxieties that are related to social media and digital activity. I visited a school in San Francisco in March or May, I can't remember, but some time ago, about 5 or 8 weeks ago. I went to school where they have no computers. They have no digital technology. They have none of that stuff. And they're making things out of wood. And they're, you know, and in San Francisco, right? So like, whoa, what's going on here? And they've taken a decision to do that. But they've taken it for a reason. They're reacting to information. So, you know, we are intelligent. Humans are intelligent. They can learn, you know. So I think that changing behaviours, constructing strategies in which we take time, And, you know, as a music manager, I've always had a don't work on Sunday. I've always had that because I had 4 kids. I had one day when I could actually acknowledge the presence of my children in my life. So you have to do that. So I always had a Sunday rule. And I think that, you know, whether you've got a Lord or you haven't got a Lord, a Sabbath is worth having, personally.
I think we could probably have a whole other session on education. We could, and perhaps we should. So we'll kind of make a mental note of that, because I know that Help Musicians is really keen to do much more signposting, even though we can't necessarily directly support people under the age of 18 yet. We certainly want to get more involved in more signposting. And then I think there's also something about people who aren't in educational institutions and how we reach them and support them to create, you know, start their journeys off with their eyes perhaps a little bit widened. But Chris, I was going to ask you, just reflecting back on the industry and less about the artists, because obviously you work with a lot of people who are not the performers on stage, and how measures of success affect people in the non-performing side of the industry.
Well, I work with a cohort which is students, typically 18 to 24. I concur. You know, everybody wants to be successful, whatever that means. And I'm guessing for the students, and we're very, very lucky where I work. I work at a place called Backstage Academy. It's up in West Yorkshire near Pontefract. I know, who knew? We've got a parent company called Production Park who design, manufacture and build stage sets for some of the largest artists in the world. We're our students are really lucky because there's a really, really high success rate for going into employment. It's 93%. So 93% of our students walk straight into a job. I just want to go back a little bit though, because I want to concur with what you both said. Education is absolutely key. The conversation is absolutely key. 3 years ago, Backstage Academy didn't have pastoral care. And just by kind of being in the right place at the right time, I had a conversation and offered myself up to advise them and was drafted into a role. And the first thing that we did, we talked about, okay, so where does well-being fit within the curriculum? Where does well-being fit and the notion of well-being fit in learning? And it didn't fit. There was nothing. And so over the last 3 years, we've developed that, and it starts on day one in Freshers Week and Enrolment Day, and it starts. I've had to make a cultural shift in my own way of practice. So you know, Adam will know about this as a therapist. You know, there's that relationship, and that relationship's really bracketed. It can't be dualistic. So you know, in the university services I've worked in before, you don't see students outside of the therapy room. You're not seen on the corridors. The approach that I have taken, and I've taken this through supervision and tried to understand it, is I work in a community. I work in a community of 176 students. We've got a restaurant on site. We've got corridors. My office is right in the middle of where people learn. Why should I not be seen on the corridor? So I do that. And I start that off on enrolment day, where we do a little forum like this, where it's like, right, okay, my name's Chris. I worked in music for 20 years. I'm a therapist now. I'm the guy that you come to when you start to have a meltdown, when things don't quite go in the way that you think they're going to go, because what you might be told is that university life are the best days of your life. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're really difficult. You're at a stage where classically, you know, from 18 to 24, you're in a major shift, transitional shift in your lives, and it's going to be tough. It's going to be really tough, and it's at that point that you need to come and have a chat, come and have a cuppa. You know, you don't make cuppas for your clients, do you? Yeah, bang right, I do. Yeah, they're a human being. I'm a human being. I'm old enough to be the dad, although I don't feel like I am. You know, but It's about that one-to-one thing, but it starts with education.
Well, Chris, we're going to book you again, obviously,
Yes.
to have a bigger conversation about education. In fact, you're all welcome to come and join us in that conversation. I want to move on to a bit more about support then for people within the industry. Obviously, one of the things that came out of that survey was a series of pledges, and one of those pledges was for us to create Music Minds Matter, which is displayed beautifully on these wonderful letters. It's a 24/7 confidential mental health support line and service for the whole of the music industry. The number, if you don't know it, is 0808 802 8008. That's on our website, and there is a Music Minds Matter website as well. It's free. I think one of the most important things to get across is that you can ring it and it's free, and you will get access to telephone support. Initially, it's about signposting. It's about a listening opportunity for you to be listened to. We talked a bit about actually being listened to, but also it can transfer you into more therapeutic services if you should need them, and come back in through Help Musicians support, different kinds of support functions. We've heard from hundreds of people who've called that number so far, and we're looking at how we can develop that even further. So we're really interested to keep moving this conversation on, but also keep developing the services so that we can make sure that we actually really are supporting people where the needs are. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the support that's out there on offer. Help Musicians has Music Minds Matter, and there are other support functions out there, all sorts of clinical pathways, other charities and organisations. Chris, can you just talk very briefly, because we are slightly running out of time, and I think we are going to have to finish very quickly. But can I just take from each one of you some top tips around support? So we had a really great session earlier on this morning, which was led by Christine, and we heard some really fantastic things from Goldie Rocks and also from a breathing coach. But so can I just ask each of you to leave us with some top tips of support? Perhaps Chris, a little bit of a debunking the myth of therapy. Sally, whatever you want to add to what support functions are out there, and then Adam, also things that you may have experienced that you may want to talk to people about, whether that's practices and different things that you've experienced. So over to Chris.
There's tons of support out there. What you're doing is amazing. What support music does is amazing. What Mind does is amazing. What Calm does is amazing. You know, you alluded to the myth of therapy. I think there's a myth in therapy, and I say this to a lot of clients, that over here in this drawer, I open it, there's a golden light, and it's the answer. And it's not. It's not over there in the drawer. It's inside you. And part of the answer for me is that a client has to purposefully engage. It's about purposeful engagement. It's about purposeful engagement. Often we were talking earlier on a different panel about self-care. Only by committing to self-care, and I mean, I don't mean that going and having therapy, but only by committing to something can you actually really, really move forward. Because I don't do stuff, and Adam doesn't. I'm pretty certain you don't. You don't do stuff. You don't wave a magic wand. You're not doing. I don't think clients are broken. I think everybody has got exactly all the resources they need at any given moment. It's just about tapping into those resources. Sometimes getting through a really tough patch. When somebody dies close to you. I had a very really close bereavement recently, and it is really, really painful. But I recognise that it's painful, and I will go through my grieving process, whatever that is, for the next probably few years. But I'm really aware of that, and I'm engaging in it, and I'm not afraid. We talked about vulnerability. I'm not afraid. I had a cry about it last night. I lost my mate Andy, who I've known since school. He dropped dead early this year. It's really, really painful. I'm not going to see him again. But I'm not going to shy away from it. I'm going to engage in thinking about him. I'm going to engage in naming what it is for me, and it's painful. And it makes me feel vulnerable, and it makes me feel really sad. Have conversations. Say one thing, there are loads and loads of brilliant organisations which Help Musicians is one of them. Engage, purposefully engage.
Thanks, Chris. Sally.
Well, just I mean, I speaking from a position of responsibility as a manager and somebody who's an employee and a teacher, I think the thing is listening. Like, that's the big thing for me, is listening. As Chris says, as you said, there are places to go, but what's very important is to listen, I think, particularly if you're in that situation, because I don't think people themselves always immediately identify or come forward with saying that they're in trouble or that they need help. But I think being open to seeing that and listening to what people are saying is paramount. Is a kind of paramount. Just be like that. Just learn to be like that, and be kind. Just be kind.
Adam.
Cost anything.
I would just say, I guess the classic reaching out or staying in relationship, I think, is so important to stay connected. I think at the times when we all have those wobbles, we tend to go to our caves and stuff, and I think it's just crucial. And whether that connection is provided by a helpline or friends or peers or anything. And think about it, if there's any artists in there, maybe take some time to think about what it is you want, what it is from that you actually want, and try and reflect upon it and how that might impact you. But, relationship.
Thank you. And some of the other top tips we heard this morning are, all sorts of things from meditation to mindfulness, sleep. Sleep workshops are one of the next things that we're going to be starting to look at. Having some unwind time, having some time where you don't do anything, that giving your brain a chance to rebuild and relax. Nutrition, exercise. So we talked about support network, having people around you, those people close to you, and also those people working alongside you and using your support network. And the tech detox. Have a day off from technology. So I'm sorry that there haven't been any time for questions. I looked at my watch earlier on and I thought, we're going to be fine for questions. This is going really slowly. And then it's kind of galloped in the middle. So I'm sure the panel wouldn't mind staying around for a few minutes unless there's a burning question that I'm looking at Indy and she's shaking ahead of me. If there's a burning question anybody wants to ask right now, I think we've maybe got a chance for one burning question. Otherwise, the panel will be around for a little bit. Very little bit, if you wanted to grab somebody and ask them one quick question at the back. But thank you very much to the panel, to Chris, to Sally and Adam. Thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate your support for Help Musicians. Thank you to the panel.